In the annals of American crime, few figures are as chillingly notorious as our central character today. In the vast, labyrinthine world of penitentiaries where the most hardened criminals are held, there exists a hierarchy, a pecking order, if you will, of the most dangerous, the most ruthless, the most feared. But standing tall, casting a long dark shadow over all others, is one man. A man whose reputation precedes him, a man whose name alone is enough to strike fear into the hearts of even the most hardened felons. His name echoes through the corridors of prisons nationwide. Whispers of his deeds, his ruthlessness, his complete lack of remorse, send shivers down the spines of those who dare to speak it. He's not just a man, he has become an embodiment of terror, a living testament to the darkest depths of human depravity. The public sentiment towards this inmate is a cocktail of fear, fascination, and loathing. This man, our central character, is not a hero nor an anti-hero. He is a villain in the truest sense of the word, a personification of pure, unadulterated evil. He's become a symbol, a grim reminder of the monstrous capabilities that lie within the human soul when left unchecked. His crimes, oh, his crimes. They're not the petty misdemeanors of a small-time crook, nor the calculated moves of a white-collar criminal. They're the actions of a man who has crossed the line that separates humanity from monstrosity, a man who has plunged headfirst into the abyss of the unimaginable. We will not delve into the specifics, not yet. Instead, we'll let the gravity of his reputation, the weight of his name, linger in the air, heavy and potent. His name sends shivers down the spine of even the most hardened criminals. Meet America's most feared prisoner. This is where our story begins, in the darkest corners of the American criminal justice system, with the man who has become its most terrifying inmate. Every monster has an origin. Our subject's story begins not in a prison cell, but in the most ordinary of American households. Born into a typical family setup, a loving mother and a hard-working father, our subject was seemingly no different from any other child. The family lived in an unremarkable suburb, where days were marked by school runs, baseball games, and family barbecues. As the middle child in a brood of 5, our subject was neither the oldest, bearing the burden of responsibility, nor the youngest, showered with attention. He was just there, blending into the background, unremarkable and unnoticed. However, even in these early years, there were signs of what was to come. School records paint a picture of a child who was intelligent but disengaged, often lost in his own world. He showed a peculiar fascination with the macabre, a trait that disturbed his teachers but was dismissed by his parents as a harmless eccentricity. His early life was not without incidents either. There were fights at school, a disturbing incident involving a neighbor's pet, and an unsettling fascination with fire that led to several close calls. These incidents, while alarming, were rationalized as the actions of a troubled but not necessarily dangerous child. This was the period when the foundations were laid, the early signs of a path that would lead to unimaginable horrors. A combination of underlying psychological issues, an environment that failed to recognize these issues, and a series of incidents that were overlooked or ignored, all contributed to the making of a monster. But during this time, he was just another face in the crowd, another name on the roll call. His teachers saw a troubled child, his peers saw an outsider, and his parents saw a son they didn't quite understand. Little did anyone know, this seemingly average child would grow up to become a figure of unparalleled terror. As the years passed, a disturbing transformation took place. The ordinary boy became a man, and the man became a monster. It began subtly, with the petty thefts and small-time hustles that seemed common enough in the rough neighborhood where he grew up. He was smart, cunning, and his actions were convincing enough to keep suspicions at bay. But these early misdemeanors were just the first steps in a chilling descent into the abyss of crime. As he grew older and bolder, his crimes escalated. He moved from petty theft to armed robbery, from hustling to dealing drugs. Every act more audacious, every crime more brazen. He was no longer just a troublemaker. He was a full-fledged criminal, a menace to society that was growing more and more dangerous with each passing day. The impact on his community was palpable. A sense of fear and unease began to permeate the neighborhood. Mothers warned their children about him. Shopkeepers bolted their doors at the sight of him. And even the toughest guys on the block gave him a wide berth. He was like a storm cloud, casting a dark shadow wherever he went. And yet, despite the terror he spread, the authorities seemed powerless to stop him. Arrests were made, charges were filed, but he always managed to slip through the cracks of the justice system. Each acquittal, each early release, only served to embolden him and deepen the sense of dread that hung over the community. His name became synonymous with fear. Tales of his exploits spread far and wide, whispered in hushed tones and shared with wide-eyed horror. He was no longer just a man. He was a monster, a boogeyman whose very mention sent chills down the spine. With every act, his infamy grew, and so did the fear. At the height of his criminal career, America held its breath in collective terror. During this reign of horror, the most chilling and gruesome crimes were committed, ones that still echo in our collective memory. The scope and brutality of these acts were unthinkable, creating a dark shadow on the nation's consciousness that remains to this day. The crimes were not only violent but meticulously planned, displaying a chilling level of forethought and cunning. The infamous crime spree started with a string of burglaries and escalated to more violent offenses. Each incident was marked by a signature level of brutality, leaving a trail of fear and devastation in its wake. The public reaction was nothing short of panic. The media dubbed him the Phantom Menace, a name that captured the nation's dread perfectly. Every breaking news report, every newspaper headline served only to amplify the terror that gripped the nation. But what was truly remarkable was not just the audacity of these crimes, but how the perpetrator managed to elude capture for so long. He was always one step ahead of the authorities, vanishing into thin air after each heinous act. His ability to blend into society, to appear as just another face in the crowd, made him all the more terrifying. He was not just a criminal, but a master of disguise, a chameleon who could change his appearance at will. The authorities were left scratching their heads, always chasing shadows. They had to deal with a criminal mind that was not only ruthless but also exceptionally intelligent. This combination of brutality and intellect made him a formidable adversary, a phantom that seemed almost impossible to catch. And so, the reign of terror continued, with each crime more shocking than the last. The public lived in a state of constant fear, never knowing when or where the Phantom Menace would strike next. He was not just a criminal, he was an enigma, a phantom that struck fear into the heart of America. But even the most fearsome reigns of terror must eventually come to an end. The downfall of America's most feared prisoner was as dramatic as his rise. A game of cat and mouse with law enforcement that had lasted for years finally ended when a single piece of evidence led to his capture. This was no high-speed chase or dramatic shootout, but a quiet, methodical closing of the net by tireless detectives who had vowed to bring him to justice. The trial that followed was a spectacle that gripped the nation. Prosecutors presented a damning body of evidence, painstakingly gathered over years of investigation. The defense fought back with all they had, but the weight of the crimes was too great. The jury deliberated for days, wrestling with the enormity of the decision they had to make. In the end, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty. The sentence was swift and severe. Multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. A clear message from the justice system that such acts of violence and terror would not be tolerated. The prisoner was sent to a maximum security facility, where he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. His reign of terror was over, but the memory of his crimes would linger. Life in prison was a stark contrast to the freedom the prisoner had once enjoyed. His days were now regimented and controlled, a far cry from the chaotic and violent life he had led outside. He became a model prisoner, but his reputation preceded him. The other inmates knew who he was and what he had done. His name was whispered in hushed tones, a chilling reminder of the man he once was. His legacy, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the most ordinary of facades. The story of America's most feared prisoner is a cautionary tale, a stark illustration of the depths to which a person can descend when they choose a path of violence and crime.